The door appears to be opening a crack for Canada's provinces when it comes to restarting the economy. Hello and welcome to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand. We're coming to you from a remote location and practicing physical distancing to enhance safety. After about 6 weeks of lockdowns for Canadians due to the pandemic, premiers from across the country, for the most part, are releasing plans to ease emergency restrictions and opening up parts of their economy. In Ontario, there's a three-step plan. It's a little short on dates. In Quebec, a bit more open with the addition of children returning to school. In Saskatchewan, the plan will start with the resumption of elective surgeries canceled during the pandemic. In Alberta, golf courses will soon open. Coming up on the Unpublished Cafe, we'll take a look at the plans and get some analysis from the business community as well as political reaction. And to get us some perspective from Queen's Park, I'm pleased to be joined by Ottawa South MPP John Fraser. And John, at your point, or from your point of view, is it prudent now to reopen the economy?
I think we have to start getting ready to open the economy and slowly opening it up in a way that is in keeping with how we're able to manage the disease, so that we can manage the disease, which is really, what social distancing and all this time is about, is to give us some time and some space so that we're able to be able to manage this disease, because it's going to be with us for the next, 18 months or so. Mm-hmm. So it's really, we have to be prudent and cautious, and make sure we give individuals and business owners time to prepare, because it won't be business as usual for any of us for the next little while.
Now, in terms of the Ontario plan, it's laid out in three steps, but there are no dates. The fact that there's no dates, does that concern you or not?
No, I think I think right now it doesn't concern me, because I don't think we've given people enough information to get ready. And I think what happened in Ontario was the government talked about announcing a plan, and what they actually announced was really, here's some principles and a very 10,000 foot, or 80,000 foot, a set of steps, and people were looking for more detail. We saw some of that come out yesterday for some of the things they're going to be opening on Monday, and then talking to other businesses about what they're going to need to do when we do, when they do come to open. Mm-hmm. And so it's just starting to come out now, and I think there's a communications problem, which created a lot of expectations with people. So we've got calls and people are saying, "Oh, when's it going to happen?" And because they expected that on Monday. So, but we've seen, there's some sort of gradual stuff happening on the 4th. I think you'll see that move as we go along. And the most important thing for us to do, and for the government to do, is to ensure that people have access to things like the protective equipment that they need for whatever their work is, or for those people who are going out shopping. We need to make sure there's some access to that, and that there's a plan, and businesses are prepared, and there's some ground rules out there for everybody, especially for employers to protect employees, because even now you can see some variations when you go to different stores. So
yeah. That's just it. And a lot of people, I think that leads to some confusion for shoppers, because at one store it's everybody's got a mask and gloves and the hand sanitizer, and others you just stay 6 feet apart. So
yeah, well, people are meeting you at the door and giving you some hand sanitizer and cleaning off the carts and giving you some instructions, and some have security guards, some don't. There's some, and some places the staff are more trained than others. Mm-hmm. Right. So, I was in a store the other day where sort of clearly some of the staff, weren't really educated in social distancing.
Obviously a beautiful day today here in Ottawa. The weather is getting better. How important is it to have more open space for people to move around?
Oh, I think it's a really important part of what we're going to do moving forward. We have to kind of liberate people in a way that's safe. And if we have open spaces, we have to find a way to manage those. Like we've got the Gatineau Park, and I can understand why the NCC closed it, but we've also got this big space now, and we have to figure out how to manage it, because it's going to be healthy for people. Mm-hmm. If we do it the right way. And, we can't we can't, we have to ease those restrictions as well and manage them.
Do you see any contingencies in the Ontario plan if another outbreak or a flare-up were to occur?
I think from the perspective of our ability to mobilize the acute care system, we've done a very good job of our hospitals. We have actually there's kind of two stories here. One is I think we're really well prepared for the general population from the hospital perspective, done a great job there. But in our long-term care homes and other group settings, there's a fire that's burning right now. And so we've got to manage that. We've got to better manage that one right now so that it doesn't start to overwhelm the acute care system. But I think that I am confident that that we can take the right measures. I think, for instance, in the areas of home care and long-term care home care, we needed to move quicker on improving the wage enhancement for those employees there and giving them more stable employment, because that's part of the problem that we have there, is that we have an unstable workforce, and there's been some big changes for them because this is happening, and it creates hardship for them. So people are saying to themselves sometimes, I want to go to work, but I can only work at one place, and I got to protect my family, and I'm making a meager wage. So anyhow, I think that's an important thing for us to remember, because I know that the government's moved to enhance wages, but we have a longer problem than a 4-month problem, right? This is, if this comes up again in September in the flu season and we get another outbreak, it's going to present some challenges.
John, I want to thank you for joining us.
No, my pleasure, Ed. It's great to talk to you. Anytime, just send us a note. Happy to chat.
John Fraser's the MPP for Ottawa South. In New Brunswick, restrictions started easing last week, and it was another act of cross-party support in response to the pandemic. And it's seen the Premier invite fellow party leaders to form an all-party cabinet committee to deal with COVID-19. And as part of the decision to relax restrictions, that came when New Brunswick experienced a 6th straight day of no new cases. Now, Kevin Vickers, the leader of the New Brunswick Liberals, and he joins us now. And Kevin, all party support and an all-party committee, is politics taking a back seat in New Brunswick?
Well, I think what brings us all together is this crisis, Ed, COVID-19, and the number one priority for everyone is the health and safety of our citizens. And I can tell you that all the party leaders hold this very close to their heart. And so we all decided to roll up our sleeves together on this COVID-19 outbreak and hopefully resolve the issue without any real serious incidents. And things have been very fortunate since we began.
From your perspective, how have New Brunswick residents handled the lockdown?
I think amazingly well. I think there's been an incredible amount of compliance with Dr. Jennifer Russell, our public health officer. The people here have taken it really serious. Right from the get-go, you could see a remarkable difference in circulation of traffic, pedestrian and vehicle traffic in small towns. And the other thing, we're kind of blessed here. We'd probably be very much like Northern Ontario. Geographically, we're mainly a rural society, so the most part of our population live outside our major centers, and so naturally we're apart from one another geographically. So I think that's had quite an impact as well.
Kevin Vickers is joining us on the Unpublished Cafe. He is the Liberal leader in New Brunswick, and we are talking about opening up the economies of the various provinces to the economies following COVID-19. And, Kevin, when we look at what's happened and what's going on with the situation, how much did you see or hear from New Brunswick residents who were just antsy to get the economy going again?
Well, that's really is if you think of it as a bit of a war, it's a two-front war, isn't it? On the one side, the most important side, of course, is the health, but secondly is the economy. And if our economy fails, then we don't have support for our health system. So it's critical that we address both sides of this challenge with gusto. Again, with regards to small, medium-sized business enterprises, they're having a very tough go, as I believe they are elsewhere in Canada. And all we can do is bring to the committee table, is our best advice and recommendations for the province to try to make sure that these engines of our economy survive this and are there at the end of the day so that we can get back on our feet quickly.
I think when I looked at what New Brunswick was doing, I found it interesting, the two-family bubble idea. Where did that come from, and how has that been embraced?
Yes, it actually comes from New Zealand. It's a model that we're following from New Zealand. I shouldn't say we're following it, but the model first existed there in New Zealand. And, I think there has to be a realization that you can only keep society and our people locked down for a certain period of time because, it starts to wear on everyone's mental health. And mental health, of course, is of great concern and importance as well. And so this family bubble of adopting another household, gives people the opportunity to get together and to have those social functions, be it a Sunday night dinner with grandparents or brothers and sisters and families getting together. It's really been you can see the difference. It's remarkable. It's noticeable. You can see the smiles on people's faces. It's lightened the tension that the crisis has brought us.
How much has the pandemic impacted the New Brunswick provincial economy?
Listen, it's going to be something really, really hard for everyone to recover from. This has been devastating. Only a short while ago, I think our provincial government was predicting something like a $92 million surplus this year, and we're probably looking at a very significant deficit, as is everyone. So this is going to be a real challenge. So I think key to this, though, and what I continue to bring to the table on the COVID committee is that we have to support our small businesses and make sure that they have the wherewithal to survive this the next couple of months. Just simple things as paying the rent. When you have no revenue coming in, it's really a challenge. And we hear about loans and with non-interest loans, those types of things, but that's just taking on more debt. And what our small businesses need is real support to survive this.
How well was the province prepared for the pandemic?
One thing that really truly impressed me since day one here is, and I think we can say this for all our provinces, we're blessed in this country with a remarkable public service. I think all our public health officers across the country are on pretty well rock star status right now. And, from day one, they've taken us by the hand and guided us down a path that, for the most part, has been incredible. When you compare us to other jurisdictions, other countries, just look south of the border, for example, what they're going through in the United States compared to what we are facing here in Canada. Mm-hmm. Not to say that, our two largest provinces, Quebec and Ontario, have serious challenges. Alberta would be the next one, I guess. But for the most part, as a country, I think it's been incredible. And so the preparedness and the response of our public service, they're the real heroes here, Ed. Mm-hmm. Our frontline doctors, our nurses, our maintenance staff that keep the hospitals and nursing homes clean and safe, they're the real heroes here.
Kevin, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, sir, and have a great weekend.
Kevin Vickers is the New Brunswick Liberal leader. Opening up the economy is crucial for Canada to return to normal, or at least the new normal. Brian Kingston's the Vice President of International and Fiscal Issues with the Business Council of Canada, and he joins us now. And Brian, what is the Business Council looking for when it comes to reopening the economy?
Well, first and foremost, we're looking for a carefully coordinated, consistent approach to opening the economy, because the last thing we want to have happen here is that this is done too quickly. Employees aren't protected, customers aren't protected, and we end up seeing another health crisis, which requires a shutdown at a later date. So we have to have coordination and consistency across provinces to make sure that this is done right.
Now, you're talking about a consistent national approach, but can that be done when you consider the provinces and the federal government don't exactly have the warmest relationship?
It definitely makes things challenging, but we were encouraged to see just a few days ago the Prime Minister and First Ministers met, and they put out some guidelines for how to manage the reopening. So, it's a good step, and it gives provinces the guidance and the framework to go ahead and plan their reopenings. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we need to see a stronger relationship and more coordination, particularly on the testing and tracking side of things, because, of course, we're not going to be able to contain this if we're not able to test Canadians quickly and then, importantly, trace who they've been in contact with and shut down any potential outbreaks as quickly as possible.
I guess from the Business Council's point of view, about if this going too fast, you get another outbreak and then the economy is just going to go back downhill again.
Well, that's exactly it. We have seen now the government spend $252 billion. That's the size of the deficit that we're projecting for 2020 and 2021 in supporting the economy through this very difficult time. That's supporting Canadians with the emergency wage, as well as the emergency response benefit. These are the right responses, but it underlines that we simply can't go through this again. We can't afford it. So if we don't get this right, and we find ourselves having, effectively what we're calling a W-shaped recovery, we have a little bit of resurgence of economic activity over the next few weeks. And then let's say in the fall, there's an outbreak again. We have to close everything. The economy goes in the tank, and government's having to spend again to support Canadians and businesses. That is the last thing we need.
Brian Kingston's joining us on the Unpublished Cafe. He's the Vice President of International and Fiscal Issues with the Business Council of Canada, as we talk about opening up the economies as we get through this pandemic. And there's a number of different approaches provincially to reopening the economies. From your perspective, Brian, which do you like the best?
I've been actually very encouraged with what Alberta's been doing, particularly with the creation of a tracking and tracing app, which they have released and Albertans are downloading on their phones. We've seen from other countries, if you're going to be successful against this virus, that is a absolutely critical component to it. If you look at what the South Koreans have done, for example, and they've had some real success, tracking and tracing outbreaks of COVID-19 are fundamentally important. So I think Alberta deserves a lot of credit for that approach. The framework that Ontario has put out is quite comprehensive, and the way that they're phasing in the reopening, I think there's a lot to learn there for other provinces. So those are two that really stand out to me as being kind of on the leading edge.
The Ontario one doesn't really come with much in the way of dates, though.
No, it doesn't, and I think that's the right approach, because you can't set a date until we actually see a consistent decline in the number of cases. So they've kept it purposefully vague so that they can take the best advice of health officials and then move forward with the reopening. I think it would be a mistake to put very set in stone dates on reopening, because we just don't know how the virus will behave, and we don't know if there will be community transition, which would then throw that schedule completely out the window.
Are there any countries that you would point to, or at least the Business Council would point to as an example for Canada to follow when it comes to reopening the economy after the pandemic?
Definitely, I would point to South Korea. They've done a great job. Singapore was doing quite well, although they've had recent outbreaks. But in both instances, the testing and tracing has been critical. The other key piece here is protective equipment. And countries that have done this successfully have made sure that businesses and citizens have access to protective equipment, be it masks, gloves, face shields, you name it. And that will be absolutely critical here, because we can't expect people to go back to work. And, in some workplaces, maintaining physical distance is relatively easy. But think about a 40-story office tower with 2 elevators. How do you get people up and down every single day, ensuring that this distance is maintained? So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of making sure people have the right equipment and protocols in place. And I think we can learn from South Korea and how they've approached that.
I read your recent article regarding medical supplies and the resilience of the Canadian economy, and I guess looking for the silver lining in this whole pandemic. Is that an opportunity for Canada to maybe sort of shift the economy a bit towards medical supplies, PPE, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity. This whole crisis has made people rethink their supply chains and the resiliency of their supply chains. The one caution here is we don't know what the next pandemic will look like and what supplies will be required. So we're never going to be able to be completely independent and resilient in building our own sort of medical supply and protective equipment. But we should, this is really underlying the importance of having a strong industrial capacity. I've been really impressed by companies like GM and Linamar who've been able to pivot very quickly and build other things, be it ventilators or masks. So there's importance about having that in your economy. And I think with the new trade deal, the USMCA, there will be an emphasis on strengthening the North American economy and making sure that we have a little bit more resiliency as a continent. So I do see a bit of an opportunity there. And, you hate to see an opportunity in such an awful situation, but I think that is one potential bright spot down the road.
Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Brian Kingston's Vice President of International and Physical Issues with the Business Council of Canada. Now, the guide to reopening the economies appears to be gradual opposed to widespread. The bottom line in all the plans is to ease into it and to avoid another flare-up of the pandemic. Now, Ontario's brought in guidelines for employers to follow. And Chris McDonald teaches business ethics at Ryerson University, and he joins us now. And Chris, it must be a tightrope for employers who have to balance the business and costs of dealing with this pandemic as well as the safety of the employees.
It is. And I think it's going to be increasingly so as we, hopefully within weeks or months move into a phase where more and more businesses are starting to reopen. We're going to start to see restaurants having to figure that out. We're going to start to see retail outlets having to figure it out. And it's going to be interesting for sure.
Now, in terms of Ontario, these are described as guidelines and not necessarily rules. And usually guidelines, if there's no sort of stick at the end, some people just take advantage of the situation, do they not?
Yeah, they may well, but they may well also find out that the stick at the end is public opinion. If someone gets sick at your establishment and it later is found out that you weren't following guidelines, there are going to be some very hard questions to answer, I think.
What should employers be doing or putting in place to ensure safety right now?
Well, I think it's, the answer is going to vary enormously depending on what kind of establishment you are. If you're a small local bar, that's different from being, a large retail clothing outlet. But I think, a couple of overarching considerations. One is to talk to people who have an interest in it. Talk to your stakeholders. Talk, in other words, to your employees. Maybe talk to customers. See what they think is going to work and what's going to meet their interests. Because ultimately, one of the main overarching principles here is you want to be able to have good answers to the questions when people ask them. So when people say, hey, why is it you're doing it this way? You want to be able to say, well, look, we thought it through, we talked to the relevant people, and here's the reasoned procedure we came to, as opposed to saying, gee, I don't know, it just seemed like a good idea at the time.
What recourse do employees have if they feel their workplace is not safe or has not been made safer?
Well, there's a number of options, I guess, and some of them would involve legal action, I guess, and I'm not a lawyer, so I won't go into those.
No.
But certainly, you would hope in any decent workplace, talking to your manager and making your opinion known would be number one on the list. Ultimately, you've got the option of at least in principle, of quitting, though that, of course, makes life difficult in other ways. And in some cases, it may inspire unionization. It may inspire collective action, either formal or informal.
What about liabilities for employers if a possible outbreak occurs in the workplace? Is that something that they have to worry about? What kind of an impact?
Yeah, great question. Again, kind of a legal question, so I'm going to steer a little bit clear of it, but certainly liability in the broad sense, as in, are you going to be held accountable for it? I think, the answer is clearly yes. I mean, if first and foremost, people are going to hold you accountable, but with their purchasing dollars, right? If you're responsible for an outbreak, people just aren't going to be showing up. So I think companies have all kinds of reason to want to be cautious and to say, look, we want to open up, but we want to open up safely. We want to open up in a way that's not just going to gain us sales next week, but the week after and the week after and the week after.
We bandy around that phrase, frontline workers, those on the front line. Of course, with emergency responders, we see that, doctors, nurses. But, right now we're looking at people who are delivering takeout. We're talking about grocery store workers, people who were not really the most respected professions in the world. They're getting a bit of a different look and a little bit more respect now, are they not?
Yeah, I think, it puts a very different spin on, for example, the training that those kinds of people receive. I mean, these are jobs that are, in some cases, not very well paid. They're precarious, and in some cases, at least, employers aren't very motivated to spend a lot on training and getting people, either trained. Certainly, not a lot of training done in the past on how to deal with customers in this kind of context. And I think it also means that, and I've argued before that, one thing it means is that people that had jobs we kind of took for granted can't really be taken for granted anymore. And so, for example, those of us who are able, not everyone's able, but those of us who are able ought to be upping our game in terms of tipping when it comes to the people bringing food to our door, because they've got a tough job and they've got a job that's arguably a good deal more dangerous than the jobs of those of us who have the luxury of working from home.
Chris, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Chris McDonald's an associate professor, as well as chair of the Department of Law and Business and the director of the Ted Rogers Leadership Center at Ryerson University. Now it's your time to weigh in on our unpublished .vote question. Do you feel the time is right to start opening up the economy? Yes, no, or unsure? You can log on and have your say right now. I want to thank our guest today, Ottawa South MPP John Fraser, Kevin Vickers, the leader of the New Brunswick Liberals, Brian Kingston with the Business Council of Canada, and Chris McDonald teaches business ethics at Ryerson University. And I want to thank you for listening to the Unpublished Cafe. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.